Hello and welcome to another episode of the ICC Academy Livecast, a new podcast series where we take a deeper dive into global business trends and ideas. I'm your host, Thomas Paris, and in this episode, we will discuss what it takes to innovate in the academic world today and what may be coming in the next few years. Our special guest today is Daniel Kselman, Vice Dean at the IE School of Global and Public Affairs at IE University in Madrid. Thank you so much for joining us, Daniel. How are you doing?
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I'm doing very well.
So as a newcomer to the ICC Academy audience, tell us a little bit about your background and what it is that you are working on now.
So my background, I am, as you mentioned, the Vice Dean of Academic Affairs here at IE School of Global and Public Affairs. And what that means is that I design and lead a lot of our academic programs in terms of, figuring out what courses we want to have, what skills we want to impart, what objectives academically we want to achieve. And then I also manage our wide-ranging and wonderful faculty and make sure we have the best people on a class-by-class basis in the classroom teaching away. I also continue to be a faculty member myself, which means I continue to teach courses and also conduct academic research. And so I am sort of a jack of all trades here at IE, doing everything from teaching to academic administration to social scientific research. And I very much like my job. I'm from an academic family. Both of my parents have history PhDs. My dad was a faculty member and my mom an administrator at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. So I feel very at home in the university world. It's from whence I come and where I am. And I also have, and it's something I have a lot of passion for. I've always liked the world of thought and the world of intellect. And so I like doing academic research, but I also have always been somebody who's very interested in impact and in applications. And so teaching at a place like E is wonderful because in addition to generating ideas and generating knowledge and conducting original social scientific research, we really are trying to train students who are going to go out into the world and make a difference. And so that is kind of who I am and what I love to do and why I like my job so much.
Great. No, that definitely sets the stage for the conversation we're about to have. So as some listeners might remember, we've done several conversations on the topic of education, even online education and university education. But this one's going to have a little bit of a different slant. But one common question that I ask for people who are working in academia, regardless of which end of the spectrum it is essentially where you see the global industry of academia going, because there are a lot of different perspectives about what it is that's going to be disruptive in this industry. But I'm curious, as we sort of dive into the conversation, sort of your thoughts on where you think we're heading.
That's a very interesting and fundamental question, because I do think we're at a moment of pretty profound change in the academic industry. I think it's also a difficult question because academia is a very particular type of industry. I mean, when I think about that question, I mean, I as a traditional academic also start to think, okay, how is the field of history going to change? How is the field of economics going to change? So, but when you try to move beyond, the specific types of changes we're going to see intellectually in different fields of inquiry and different pedagogies, I think there are a number of things that are going to be pretty global. And I think we're going to see evolutions in content. I think we're going to see evolutions in format, but I also think we're going to start to see evolutions in the mission of universities and in what our basic sort of core values and core objectives are. And so, so for example, in terms of content, I think invariably we are going to see more content that deals with data and technology. I think that we are going through a new industrial revolution that is changing the way that we live and changing the way that we learn and changing the way that we make public and private decisions. And I think all of that requires deep evolutions in the way we approach education. And so I think so part of this is teaching new quantitative methods. I think the world of big data and the world of information technology has opened, I don't want to say a Pandora's box because that has kind of a negative connotation, but has opened a world of opportunity, let's say, when it comes to this decision-making and analysis. And I think more and more we want to impart students with, if some students at least with the technical capacity to manipulate big data sets and big data applications, and all students with the ability to think creatively about how these new data sources and new data analysis techniques can inform decision making. But beyond just data, I think we need to really rethink the role of technology in our lives, in various facets of our lives, from the way we work to the way we consume, to the way we produce, to the way we interact as families, and these all of the way in which social media and information technologies and artificial intelligence and blockchain, all of these things are changing the way we live, and we need to, on a discipline by discipline basis. I am a political scientist. My school, the IE School of Global and Public Affairs, has content on, has, for example, we have an economics program. In all of these fields, from political science to economics, but also to history, to engineering, we need to law, to ethics, we need to rethink a little bit the ways in which technology is changing our world, changing how we live, changing the scientific but also ethical questions we need to ask about human life and society. And so let me give you, one example. And I'm really here. I can take a step back and say with great satisfaction that we are partnering with you all, with the ICC and the ICC Academy, on a new executive master program, which is called the Executive Master in Internationalization and Trade, which I think you could, which is a little bit the epitome of some of these changes. I mean, it's a change in content because we're looking at trade in a really holistic and global way. We're asking, it's a program that brings together content from the world of the private sector, trade finance, trade credit, managing value chains, et cetera, but also the public and regulatory and legal sector. So we're studying the WTO, we're studying, customs regulations, we're studying all types of phenotypic, et cetera, regulations about, food quality and food processes. And so by bringing the regulatory and the sort of private sector content together and combining that content with a real sense of how digital innovation is changing trade through e-commerce, through the use of blockchain as a sort of, accounting mechanism for trade practices. There's more and more conversation of that. All of this, I think, leads to, and this is also, I had also mentioned that we're going to see evolutions in format. This is also a program that is a blended program where there's going to be periods of deep sort of, connection between students, presential periods in Madrid and in Geneva, where our students come together and interact with each other and interact with their faculty in very immersive and intense ways. And then periods of online education where they are, working from home, keeping their normal job and family rhythms, and working on weekends and working in evenings. And we have really neat ways through online fora, through participatory mentoring, et cetera, to make that a really vibrant experience. So this is a program where we're changing the content, we're changing the format through these blended learning experiences. And also, I had mentioned changing the mission. Well, this is a program that has a real focus on impact and on sustainability. And so, one of our other partners, in addition to the ICC in the program, is the International Trade Center in Geneva, whose focus is really on small and medium-sized enterprises in the quote unquote in the world that's not already wealthy, and bringing those enterprises into value chains. And there's a course in the program on Agenda 2030 and how trade can be a mechanism for development and sustainability. And so I think in this program, you see distilled a lot of the broader changes that we're likely to encounter in the education industry, a move in terms of content towards a better understanding of digital innovation and technology, and towards integrating worlds which often don't talk to one another, the sort of trade finance and the trade regulation world, et cetera, an evolution in format insofar as we're really finding creative and I think exciting ways to blend, in-person presential experiences with online education, and a change in mission in that we really want this program to have an impact, to train traders and trade regulators to go out and not only make their lives and their careers better, but to see how their trading and their regulation of international trade and their participation in the governance of international trade can actually potentially make the world a better place. So I think all of those trends we're likely to see a lot of globally in terms of content, format, and mission. And I'm really excited to see those trends embodied in this new program we've launched.
No, thanks, Daniel. That's a fantastic overview of the program. And if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about this, this was announced back in November, and this will be launching in March. So just wanted to plug that in case you want to take a closer look at this. But you're right. I mean, not only the content, when you take a look at the digital disruption, is important, but also the ways that we're using that same technology to sort of roll out the content, I think is going to be, the next wave of the way larger universities sort of tackle content going forward, is finding a way to be as inclusive as possible, like you said, in terms of flexible learning, but also in terms of just making sure that you keep pace with the technology that these students already have on hand. It's making sure that you don't turn a blind eye to the always connected nature of your student body, because that's definitely something that's permanent now. So yeah, no, I think that's a very good point.
Absolutely. It's something that, now what's interesting is, all of this new technology and this new digital world and digital capacity, implies a change in the learning experience, and maybe even what we mean by learning. I mean, and they're fundamental changes, and they're changes that I think we have to be, very careful about, because I think that, they can be fantastic changes, but they're changes that at the same time, if not managed correctly, can actually potentially undermine our fundamental goal, which is to really train people to think and act and operate in intelligent and informed ways. And so when we think about, keeping up with this digital world, and oftentimes there's all kinds of wonderful new things that we can do in the classroom, both in terms of the traditional classroom, like, with the traditional undergraduate or master's degrees, where people come here for 4 years or 1 year and 2 year, and they're here and learning with us on site on campus, and with the flexible degrees of the variety that I just described, such as the executive we're going to be launching with our partners, including the ICC. So, I mean, we can do things like, we think about smart technology now. We think about, moving new types of software into the classroom that facilitate, for example, real-time data analysis, that facilitate global integration. So now we can do things with technology which allow students from one continent and another continent to sort of be in the same virtual environment together, and even work on, in real-time projects together. We see, all kinds of ways in which we can use technology to enhance the learning experience, and to create, for example, simulation activities where students, instead of listening to a professor lecture, are put in a simulation environment where they're making real-time decisions under pressure, potentially that affects their final grade. And so I think you can use these technological media to generate really neat and novel learning experiences. And we have to keep up with that, because that's the sort of world, those are the students that we now encounter. And it makes no sense not to evolve as an educational institution to meet that world. That said, let me also plug here, and here you'll hear the sort of traditional academic in me, that we have to be careful, because we still ultimately, we want to be training the same thing. We want to teach people to think, to analyze, and to be informed, and to use their analytic reasoning to make good decisions, whether it's as a business person, as a policymaker, or as an ethicist, or as a lab technician, et cetera. And ultimately, that requires good old-fashioned reading, writing, counting, math, the things that, maybe are harder in this new digital world to get students to concentrate on. And so I think as a university, you're put in a really interesting and exciting, but also challenging position now, in that you want to harness all of this wonderful new technological capacity to enhance the learning experience and to make it more applied and more alive and more oriented towards emotional intelligence and digital innovation. But you don't want to lose what is core to the old format of education. You don't want to lose the reading and the writing. And for example, you can't replace a traditional immersive study abroad program in a culture with, I think, these types of global, these types of virtual technologies where you put students virtually in the same classroom. So it's a matter of harnessing the technology and using it as a fantastic complement to what we know has worked for a long time in terms of teaching analytic skills. And I think it's that combination of not losing the foundation, not losing the basic training in whether it's reading and writing academic articles or doing basic mathematical calculations and statistical programs, et cetera. Maintaining all of that, and at the same time adding to that the wonderful opportunities that new technology provides. And I think if universities can do those two things effectively, we're looking at a world in which being a student is going to be really wonderful, because you're going to learn, and you're going to learn to analyze, and you're going to learn to be a really good thinker, and you're also going to enhance your emotional intelligence, your adaptive capacities, your decision-making capacities, et cetera. And so it's a challenge, but it's also a wonderful opportunity for universities to encounter this new world.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because back, I would say back in the day, but even rolling back the clock 5 or 10 years, there's a traditional way of looking at, okay, you go to school and you learn the theoretical, the book learning, as we say, and then you graduate, and then hopefully by then you would have a job, and then you learn to apply everything that you learned. Whereas now, in the new age that we're in, you are finding a way to blend both, right? That you're able to, like you said, use the simulation to actually apply what you learn as you learn it. And that definitely changes the dynamic, because now you're having an entire generation entering the workforce that has already experienced, quote unquote, in doing the things that are expected of them after a few years on the job already. So that's a very interesting way of grading on a curve. Now we're going to be, because those things are going to be expected. Going forward.
That's right. I mean, and the interesting thing there is it's not only, I think of what we do here at IE and in our programs, and part of it is this harnessing of new technology in the classroom. Another part of it is rethinking for the 21st century the types of concrete projects that we want students to work on. So, for example, if we think across our programs, students both at the undergraduate and the master's level, when they're deciding on a final project, have to just have two options generally to decide between. One is a traditional academic thesis, where you conduct some academic research and you write a big document, and you have an advisor, and it's not a dissertation like a PhD dissertation, but it's kind of a lower expectation version of that, where you produce some original academic ideas. On the other hand, we also give students the option to do what we call capstone projects, which are kind of step-by-step organizational collaborations with external stakeholders. And those external stakeholders are sometimes private corporations, are sometimes, for example, international organizations. We've had, for example, in the past, capstone projects with UNICEF and with CEGIB, which is an international organization for the Ibero, Latino, Spanish-speaking world, essentially based here in Madrid. We've also had capstone projects with NGOs, nonprofits, and social business startups. And so, and in these projects, what students do is essentially work on specific deliverables. Sometimes it's, a risk analysis report. Sometimes it's a marketing campaign. Sometimes it's a new data set with data analysis. And students work in teams, as teams of 3 or 4, for external organizations. And their final project for their degree becomes the set of deliverables that they as a team have generated for this external partner. And that really, the idea is to get them, with some on-the-job experience before they're on the job, right? And so, and And I think that this is the type of education we're going to be at the IE School of Global and Public Affairs. We're now envisioning new programs, which I think are really going to, take this new capstone project idea to the next level and build it into the entire sequence of the program, not just as a final project where you're working with external stakeholders from the beginning and getting, to the extent possible, this kind of real organizational experience from the beginning of your educational journey. And all of that is very exciting, of course. Now, of course, again, I always, as a traditional academic, want to emphasize that you don't want to, we don't want to turn everything into, whiteboards and sticky notes. We still need to, read and write and do mathematics and do the basic sort of stuff that goes into education. But now we have, alongside that, technological capacities and also new educational ideas like these capstone projects that really get students, doing applications as part of their undergraduate or master experience.
Mm-hmm. Just pivoting very slightly, going back to something that we were talking about earlier, the brick and mortar universities have a few, advantages that online only education providers can't really or have a difficulty with merging, which is the human interaction element.
Yes.
And one question I have is, now we are staring into, or we're approaching the event horizon when it comes to artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence and automation and big data. So what I'm wondering is how, in your opinion, and this doesn't, this could be more of a conceptual question more than something that you've encountered already, but how do you envision these brick and mortar universities to be able to add in a human element and add in the ethical side in a world that is going to be becoming much more dictated by algorithms and dictated by the results from AI and things like this? I'm curious about what you think the role of universities is going to be in that sort of ecosystem going forward.
That's a really interesting question. This gets to kind of, I think, what I said early on, that universities are going to involve in content, in formats, but also in mission. And so I think there's actually a couple of questions embedded in what you said. I think, one question, for example, is how are brick and mortar institutions going to evolve? And are they going to be, in an agile way, able to incorporate all of these new technological tools, but also realities? The second question is, what is the role of the sort of traditional brick and mortar university in a world where in the world that we live in, this world of new technological status quo, which poses all kinds of new ethical and fundamental questions. So I think that, my answer to the first one, how are brick and mortar institutions going to evolve to deal with this new reality? I think, sometimes very slowly. I think, one of the characteristics of brick and mortar universities is that they don't necessarily have the organizational structures in place that allows them to change rapidly. They're not. Now, that said, that's not absolutely the case. And you see a lot of brick and mortar universities now undergoing, real changes. And I can speak to the one most closely that I'm associated with, which is IE University here in Spain. And you see first of all, you see a lot of incorporation of new technology into the teaching process and into the teaching environment. You also see a proliferation, I think, of more specialized programs. So programs, you'll see, general programs like the MBA, but then a lot of specialized programs in cybersecurity, in data analytics. You'll see traditional programs like a Master in International Relations, but then specialized programs like one in international trade and one in international development. And so I think, by incorporating technology into the classroom, by creating specialized programs, you see brick and mortar universities adapting to the new and innovation-oriented environment that they operate in. Now, that said, what is the new role potentially of brick and mortar universities in this environment? And I think part of that role is, and here I don't want to sound like an old curmudgeon, but is to stay brick and mortar universities. I think it's really, I think there's something to be said for getting students on the ground and having these big institutions that have, some academic foundations and that whose aim is to incorporate new technologies, but to continue to believe that in essence, there's still something fundamental about education, which is training the mind in analysis. And analysis, I think, and again, I think universities can be one of to a certain extent, the counterweight to make sure that as we're developing and evolving technologically towards what you labeled the event horizon, we have people thinking carefully about the ethical implications of that evolution. We have people thinking carefully about the social and environmental implications of those evolutions. We have people working hard to make sure that students on the ground still interact with one another. And even, for example, in our blended programs, we work really hard as a university here at IE to make sure that when students that part of these programs is indeed presential, and that we design those presential, periods in such a way that really fosters team building and interaction and cross-cultural experiences and interaction with your faculty. And then into the online portion of the program, we also think really hard about how to make that really interactive, and to try to create the same types of intellectual exchanges that you would have had at traditional institutions. So I think, you see universities evolving, incorporating technology, adopting new programs and more specialized programs, oftentimes programs that have a tilt towards, training people for the new sort of, fourth industrial revolution economy.
Yeah.
I also like to think of universities as also having a role in governing or in accompanying that evolution towards the event horizon, or towards the whatever we want to call it, with ethical considerations, with social scientific considerations, with environmental considerations, and with a mission to still teach traditional thinking and to still bring students together in the ways that they always have. So again, I think universities have to really find that middle ground. They can't be the old brick and mortar kind of stuck in the mud institutions, and I say that with affection, that they've been for many years. They have to evolve. They have to
Right.
Adapt to the new economy, but they also have to adapt their mission, and part of their mission can be helping to govern this evolution.
So as a more of a self-branded traditionalist when it comes to this kind of thing, are there certain subjects or certain methods of learning or teaching that you think have slowly become outdated? Like one example I often go back to is, you mentioned mathematics before.
Mm-hmm.
From a real world productivity perspective, everyone now has a phone in their pocket. Okay, well, should we replace the theories behind learning the rules and the laws of mathematics and applying that to something like coding going forward? Because the mathematics you would have, so there are certain subjects that are being discussed of being either replaced or finding ways to adapt to it, given the fact that most of the student body going forward are going to have those resources available to them. So I'm curious about what you think, if there are certain subjects that will have to dramatically adapt to keep pace with what the real world environment looks like. And same goes for the teaching ways. And so to give an example for this one, just that one that comes to mind is more of a broad question of, is it more important that a student knows how to effectively use the internet to answer a question or to recall the answer from memory, right? So that's one way of gauging whether or not they are going to be productive going forward. So I'd be curious to know where it is that you stand on the subjects that universities are teaching, and also the methodologies, and which ones you think will have to adapt.
Very good question. And I think, so for example, to start with an answer to the second question, I do think it's more important for students to be able to use to use the internet, for example, to find answers than it is for them to remember things. That's what they're going to be asked to do in their jobs, is to use the internet to find answers, not to spontaneously, recall answers to questions. And I think so, and I do absolutely think we have to, and we are evolving as educators to meet these new needs. And I think that there are indeed some fields that really are going to need to change. And I think we also need to think about, in individual fields, what do students need to know? So, for example, do students need to know how to calculate inductively long, long equations? And I think no, it's easier just to sort of program in an algorithm and let students, sort of plug values into various variables in that algorithm and spit it out. So,
or learning to program the algorithm itself, thereby demonstrating their understanding of, the problem and how to solve it.
Exactly. And so I think that, that there are ways, rather than we don't need all students to know how to program algorithms. And I think now that said, so let's take the example of a field like statistics, which is a field that's close to my heart, because I think that, that I do quantitative analysis in my own research, et cetera. Now, there's always a debate in the field of statistics. Do you want students to just learn how to plug and chug? We can give them simple software that allows them to run statistical analyses and look at the results. And we don't really need to teach them actually what's going on in those statistical analyses, the actual mathematics of what's taking place. And there's a big debate always in that, in the new world we're coming to. I mean, there's all kinds of softwares that students can use to just say, hey, if I've got variable X, I want to see what its impact is on Y is. Let's just throw it into this software and have it spit out the information. And I think that, it's always a fine balance. I do think that students need to be taught those softwares, because not everybody needs to needs to be a statistics major or a statistician. That said, I also think there's a risk to equipping students to go out and throw variables into statistical analyses and then look at the results without really understanding what's going on, as they would say, in the sausage factory, in the black box. Because right. I think, and so again, I think it's a balance. I think, and it's going to be on a discipline by discipline basis that we, figure out what skills can be sort of digitized and what skills we really want students to understand at a more profound level. And I think that there are going to be a lot of skills that we want digitized. And then there's going to be other skills that we don't want, students to fully abandon. And so again, there I would find myself kind of in the middle. I think we have to, again, we have to incorporate new technologies and wherever interesting, we need to give students all the shortcuts that they're going to need to succeed. And then wherever necessary, still remain committed to teaching students, the basics. Hey, this is why that statistical analysis is generating this result, not just, hey, look at the result.
I think that's a very balanced approach. So I am mindful of time. I was wondering maybe if you wanted to end on some closing thoughts, something that, an important point that you would want to leave the audience with before we bow out.
An important point that I want to leave the audience with, maybe one that I haven't spoken as much about today, and that gets back to the issue of the mission of the university, right, and the educational mission. I think that we are coming to a historical moment with that is really transformative, and I think that moment has implies transformations for the better. And I think a lot of the digital innovation that we see out there can be harnessed really to make the world a better place. I think some of the transformations are also potentially risky. And I think, this applies to some, to some aspects of the digital revolution. We see how it, for example, I think affects politics. And I don't think it always affects politics in a constructive way. And it also applies to environmental changes and transformations, which I think, are really salient and important for us to consider as both educators and as global citizens today. And I think, what I'd like to end on is to emphasize that I think universities are going to play, as I've already mentioned a bit, a really important role in ushering and accompanying humanity into a really brave new world, as Aldous Huxley once said, right, of singularity and environmental risks, and also inequalities. And we at IE are working really hard on issues of sustainability. We just launched a new development studies program in which we partner with the UN System Staff College. We have launched this new trade program with the ICC and the ITC, and we're really I think we're really focused on being an institution which doesn't just train students and produce original research, but really becomes a voice and a platform for thinking about, for helping us all transition to what is really going to be a very different world that we live in 30 years from now. And I think that's a really important role for universities to play. And I think, again, they do that by harnessing technology and by adapting and by being flexible and by doing all the things that we've talked about in this interview, but also by not forgetting what got us here, which is teaching people to think critically and to think analytically. And so I hope that that universities can fulfill that mission of really helping humanity move to what is really going to be a very different world 20, 30 years from now.
Absolutely. And these brick and mortar universities are going to be the cornerstones going forward. So thank you again, Daniel. So if our listeners want to know a little bit more about the master's program, the executive master's program that Daniel mentioned earlier, we recommend that you head over there and check it out. So this will be launching in March 2020, and we hope you enjoy. So thank you again for your time, Daniel. This has been very interesting.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much, Thomas, for inviting me, and I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. So as a reminder, we are hosting live broadcasts every month. So sign up on our website for free and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the ICC Livecast. See you next time.